Welcome and welcome to Las Cartas Sobre la Mesa. Today in the episode number 2, we are super excited. I am Juan Agustín Maiolino, I am here with Matías Paredes. Matías, how are you?
I'm really fine. We are talking in English today. It's a special episode and we have an amazing person here with us. His name is David Parlett. You might know him because of his best known game, the Hare and the Tortoise, La Liebre y la Tortuga. And he's the first winner of the Spiel des Jahres, the game of the year. And we have him here in Las Cartas sobre la Mesa. So hello, David, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad you
I think it's
here.
I think it's amazing that like Mati and me, we are like new ones on this hobby. We started playing maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 8. But you've been here for a long time. And just to break the ice a little bit, I would like to ask you, what's the game that brought you into the hobby of like board games?
Well, like many games inventors, I suppose it must have been Monopoly, which I played as a child. But I always had a tendency to adapt anything which I like. So a school friend and I, when we were about age 14, as everybody does, we adapted Monopoly to represent the area of London that we lived in. So we changed all the street names and we put in things which don't exist in the American version of Monopoly. So we took it from there. But every time I played a lot of games in my teens, especially, and every time that I played a new game, say darts, for example, or billiards or snooker or pool, I would make a modification of my own. I just like to adapt rules to my own particular tastes and interests. So that's where it started.
I think it resonates a lot with what we do, because what we found out when we were younger was that, yeah, we loved playing games, but also we love inventing games and we love designing games. And
Yep.
I think that's what we felt inside, and we didn't know at that time that we could design our own games. And then when we grew older, we discovered this amazing world of board game designing. And I think Mati has a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, my passion is game design. I've been designing games since I was like, I don't know, 10 years old. So that's my passion. That's my work today. So I'm really passionate about it. And I wanted to ask you a lot of questions that I have to turn down to 3 questions mainly about game design. I wanted to ask you about themes and mechanics. What was first in your amazing game, Hare and Tortoise? The theme or the mechanic?
Oh, the mechanics. I tell you, if I can go back to childhood for a moment, I can tell you my first conscious appreciation of everything to do with games. And I must have been about 9 or 10 at the time. I went to visit my uncle and aunt and cousin at Christmas, and they had bought him for Christmas a games compendium. And in those days, of course, it was all the traditional games. So it included dice and dominoes and playing cards and so on. But what struck me particularly was that it included a set of dominoes on which the pips were not white, as I had only ever known. They were in different colors. And I can vividly remember the colored dots on those dominoes, and they appealed to me immediately. So I have always loved everything to do with colors and numbers. And I go for the mechanics first because I'm primarily a mathematical games inventor. I feel games more in the nature of mathematical puzzles than anything else. So I always go for the mechanics first, and then for the theme, if I can find one that fits. But I have to say that I'm getting old now, and in this day and age, my appreciation of the world and popular culture is not very much up to date. So I find it very difficult to find themes which are going to work with the modern public. But I will tell you something interesting about Hare and Tortoise, if you like,
For sure.
since you've reminded me. And that is, when I developed Hare and Tortoise, I had only the mechanics, and I had a board which I had marked into 64 or 65 squares, and I'd got the mechanism for it, and I didn't have a theme. And as I played it, I had to play the part of 4 different people. And each one of my players had a different approach. One of them would always make the most economical move and move very slowly and lag behind. Another one would be spendthrift and would go as far forward as possible and promptly run out of energy or carrots. And another one played completely at random, and another one alternated between one system and another. And as I developed the game, I realized that this was like the hare and the tortoise, depending on whether you went fast or slow. So having got that, that's what gave me the theme. So for me, the theme follows on from the mechanics, and I always do the mechanics first.
I want to point out the dedication to be testing your own game with like 4 different players, but you were playing each player.
Yes.
But the idea of making each player following a different strategy, like
yes.
you were consciously testing the game in a specific way. And I think that's amazing. I think part of the success of the game and part of the fact that it is still played today, like you can see behind Matty's corner that the game is there, and like the fact that people are still playing the game, it's because the mechanics are still very good. And even though there is a re-release with a different theme, with like 80 days around the world of something, the mechanic is still working and it's still there.
Yes, I'm still pleased about that.
I wanted to show you that the game comes with a cassette. I haven't seen one of these in years. And the cassette has like tips and tricks about the game. I don't know who recorded it, but it's amazing that it's like intact. It's never been used.
I do remember when Ravensburger produced that cassette tape. Yes, it was during the 1980s. Yes, I suppose I've got one somewhere, but I can't find it at the moment.
It's going a little bit off topic, but now Ravensburg produced that game how long? 40 years ago? More than 40 years ago. And now this year they are releasing a TCG about like with Disney characters called Lorcana. And I find it amazing that as a publisher house, they are still producing hits and they are still on the market and releasing new games. But yeah, go.
Well, you mentioned how old it is. In fact, in 2024, next year, that will be at the 50th anniversary of when I first developed the game. No, when it was first published, because I actually developed it in the autumn of 1973. So I have to say that the mechanics that I used for it, I had already used before for a game which was too complicated, and I never got as far as offering it to a publisher. The original game that had that idea was called Space Race, and the players had to get from the bottom of the board to the top of the board. Instead of being like a single racetrack with a beginning and an end, this was a hexagonal grid. And you could use your units of energy either to move forward or to turn in another direction. and I don't know quite why that didn't get anywhere. I just felt it was too complicated. So later on, I thought, yeah, I went back to it because at that time I had just joined the games testing panel of Games and Puzzles magazine. Have you heard, Games and Puzzles magazine? Maybe
yes.
not.
No, we do. And actually, we have some questions about that, but I think we will
right.
make them later.
Okay.
But yeah, amazing magazine.
But because we were testing games, we had the opportunity, if we had a game of our own, we had these ready-made testers there for us. So I went back to this idea of the movement system and decided it might be better if I made it a single line track instead of a hexagonal grid. And that really worked well.
Yeah, it makes sense with the idea of simplifying the game. Yeah. You're taking one of the decisions away, because with the hexagonal grids you can move in different directions, and in the Hare and the Tortoise there is only one direction.
Yeah.
What's amazing about this is that it uses hexagon tiles. Hexagon tiles are a thing that's still present in modern board games, and you thought about it in 1973, and that's amazing. It's like
I didn't catch what it was you said.
Hexagon tiles are something that's usually used today still.
Yes. Oh yes.
That's amazing.
I don't want to drift away too much from the topic of the Hare and the Tortoise, because I want more like a personal question. We talked a little bit about the design, but how did you feel, you personally, when the game and you as the designer won the Spiel des Jahres? What happened through your mind, through your emotions? How did it feel?
It was really quite unreal. What surprised me was the fact that I didn't know anything about it for quite some time. I was told about it by the great games designer Alex Randolph. The editor of games, founder of Games and Puzzles, Graham Levine, told me that Alex Randolph wanted to contact me about Hare and Tortoise, and he it was who told me that it was going to win this award, which surprised me greatly because I hadn't known anything about it beforehand. So yeah, that was really delightful. And I remember the award ceremony itself. It was a really big hall in Essen, and I had a difficult task. We got the opportunity to play it, of course, and I was introduced to a German family, and we sat at a table and played it. And my German is not brilliant. I did study French and German at school. I've always been keen on languages, but I had to explain this to them in German. I think I managed all right because they managed to play it and I didn't win, so I must have explained it well enough. I don't think I could do that in German again now.
We will teach you how to explain it in Spanish if you want. We will take 1 hour lesson and we will do it in Spanish.
I would enjoy that. I did do a year's course in Spanish when I was in the sixth form at school. So, and as a result of that, I can now read Spanish fairly well.
Oh, amazing. David, so at that point, like that was the first Spiel des Jahres ceremony. So how important was the prize and the award at that point? Like, were people talking as if it was the Oscars of board games? Like, because nowadays it is kind of like the most important award in board gaming. How did it feel at that time?
At that time, nobody had any idea that the Spiel des Jahres would take off the way it did, and that it would become an institution, and that I mean, how many years has it been going now? Since 1979, so that makes it 4,
Yeah.
thereabouts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was particularly surprising for me, I think, because, yeah, in those days, I didn't really think that the United Kingdom, Britain, England, whatever you prefer to call it, I didn't realize that it was at the forefront of the games industry. I've been told by Tom Wernick, the great German games critic and one of the founders of the Spiel des Jahres, that in the 1970s, everybody came to Britain to buy their games. But then, curiously, at the end of the 1970s and at the beginning of the 80s, Britain almost dropped out of the market, and Germany began to take over as the big games country, as it still is in many respects. So this was completely unreal for me. It was like a fantasy game.
Yeah, I bet so, and it's very nice, and I like the idea of this, like, a German awarding games in Germany won by a British designer. Is quite curious.
Yes, but there is a funny story about how it came to be given this award by the games testing panel. It appears that half of them thought the game was brilliant and half of them thought the game was rubbish. So so it was sort of 50-50 that way. But apparently one of the Ravensburger games wholesalers, one of the agents, said he couldn't understand this, and he played it himself, and he thought it was brilliant, fortunately. So I think that's what eventually swung them in favor of it. But I can remember that it really came as a complete surprise.
I think that talks a lot about a good game, because usually games, either you love them, you hate them, or they don't modify your game nights. And when they fall in that middle category, you will forget those games. The games that are okay, but they are not too good, neither too bad, you will not remember them. So I think it's great that some people hated it and they are not going to play that anymore. But if you make some people love your game, that's all that matters.
Yeah, well, some people just don't like doing arithmetic.
Yeah.
But I love it.
Yeah, we do too. Juan here is an engineer, and I'm studying something related to math and programming. So we are really great fans of your games and really great fans of mathematic games in general.
We have to say that one of our favorite games is Settlers of Catan. And we also ask, every time we bring a new person for the radio, for the show, we ask them what they think about the game and how much will you rate them? Like, is it a 1? Is it a 10? How much in the scale to 1, from 1 to 10? What number would you give Settlers of Catan?
I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to give it a score. It speaks for itself.
Maybe Tortoise, so it's better we don't have it and we don't give it a score.
Okay.
And maybe the last question inside the topic of game design and that tree of questions. We are also designers. We are starting our own small company in Argentina, and we are like releasing our own games, mainly through the internet, but slowly we are publishing games with other companies and with our own company as well. And we would like to ask you, what advice would you give us, as well as give advice for other entrepreneurs in this area?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to do that, because I haven't really been very active in games inventing and designing and publishing since the 1980s. I've managed to get a few games published since then, but I feel out of touch with the times. Nowadays, I'm amazed. Well, I'm not amazed. I mean, I just take it for granted, but I'm conscious of how popular fantasy games are. I don't like fantasy or science fiction at all. So I don't really like, you know, that's it. I don't like fantasy games. I don't like fantasy films. So there we are. I'm just out of touch with the times.
Yeah, today fantasy is like the big thing. Every game now is a fantasy-like or science fiction. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and I would say that also a lot of the games that are releasing these last 10 years are always sell with an IP on top. So then you find like XXX game, Marvel, or that game, Star Wars. There is a lot of that. I think you and me, Matty, we are not big fans of that. And I think that you, David, you don't also like follow those trends as well.
Yeah, well, it would be nice to do so, but the other trouble is now that most of my games testing friends of my generation, I have to say, are now dead. I mean, I'm 83, and I've lost one of my chief games testers was one of my two brothers who died 2 years ago. So that was a great loss. So I don't really get about and join in with games groups. I have to invent something more or less single-handed or with one friend. But that's about it. And I am finding it. I'm getting to an age where it's getting a bit tiring to go abroad. I enjoy going abroad. I love it. But having to go abroad with a sense of having to promote myself is something that I find too tiring. So if I can play something, I mean, some of the games I have invented games in the past few years. I've got about a dozen games in my collection, which I've never been able to sell to anybody, and I don't think a lot of people would get very much out of them.
Out of curiosity, do you have a game that you designed that you think is amazing, or you think that is very good, but no publisher has picked up on it?
Yes, several.
Whoa, that's super interesting. Matti, I think we can start talking about card games. Do you want to ask a question about card games?
Card games. We're big fans of card games, and we know that you are a big fan of card games. So what do you find appealing about them? What do you find like it's the best about card games?
Okay, let me tell you a little anecdote. When I was in my teens and discovering games and beginning to invent games, I didn't play card games at all. It was principally board games. And for the first few years of my career, I was a teacher. I taught French in school to teenagers. And in one of the schools where I taught, I did play chess quite a lot. One of the schools where I was teaching, they played, the staff during the summer, they always played Kriegspiel chess, you know, blind chess. Do you know that?
Yeah. Never played it, but I've heard of it.
Well, it's lovely. The basic idea is that the two players are separated by two screens from the board in the middle. Each player makes a move, and a referee in the middle records that move on the central board and then says to the other player, it's your turn, or something like that. And to my surprise, I turned out to be much better at Kriegspiel than I did at standard chess. And I noticed that the member of staff who always won the Kriegspiel tournament was a very keen bridge player. So I thought perhaps I should be looking at card games. And what I liked about Kriegspiel was the fact that it was a game of imperfect information. You had to think and imagine what was going on. So from that point on, I started looking at card games instead. And it's interesting. At this time, I got married at the age of 27, I think. And on honeymoon, we took with us a book called Teach Yourself Card Games for Two. So when we had time, we went through this book, my wife and I, and we just played these two-player card games. And of course, once you, as I said before, once I start playing games, I start thinking creatively about games. So ever since that time, I've concentrated more on card games than on board games. And that gives rise to another rather funny circumstance. I invented a game. I can't remember what was the first version of it, but I invented a card game which I turned into a thematic game. It did have a game. I think it was I can't remember what it. I think it might have been called Hunt the Dinosaur or something like that. And I offered it to. It might have been Ravensburger or Amigo, was it? And they liked the mechanism. So they took the game, but they used the mechanism for another theme. Now that mechanism, that card game mechanism, has been used by different companies about half a dozen times. So in a sense, it's been as successful as Hare and Tortoise, but you wouldn't, none of the games that used that mechanism are now on the market, but it went very well in its time.
Are we talking about your game Chicken Out?
Well, that's a more recent one. That I'm Chicken Out. I invented. When was it? About 10 years ago. Now, at that time, my brother, who has since died, was still alive, and so was my old school friend, Paul Chown, and the three of us and my son Edward used to get together every week to play the German card game Skat. Do you know Skat?
So I didn't know Skat before I started looking at the history of your games, and then I discovered Skat, this like 3-player German game, but I never played it.
Right, so for the first half of the evening we played Skat, and for the second half we played some other card game of my invention. So I invented this card game which I called, what was it called? Bravado. Because I actually wanted to invent a card game in which the only decision you had to make was whether or not to play a card. You either play a card or you chicken out and take all the cards off the table and start again. And the name Chicken Out came to mind in the same way that Hare and Tortoise came to mind. So I then developed the game with chickens. And so it went from there. Now, I have to say that over the past couple of years, Chicken Out is the game I most enjoy playing of mine, because it's quick. It doesn't take too long. And the more conscious I become of getting old, the less time I want to spend having to learn a new game. So you've just got this very simple, quick decision making. And somebody was watching me play it a few years ago and said, it's absolutely nothing. You know, there's nothing to decide there. You either play or you don't. But that was the whole point of it. And the extraordinary thing about it is that although you, at each turn, you either play a card or you don't, there are so many different situations in which you have to make a decision. Sometimes you have to be penalized by taking 2 or 3 cards off the table. At another time, you might get as many as 30 or 40 cards on the table, and you either win them or you have to add them to your hand to penalize you. And the variety comes not in the decisions that you have to make, but in the situations in which you have to make those decisions. And I'm pleased with Chicken Out because he's got so many different situations, and you have to do a different bit of thinking each time. So I recommend my game Chicken Out. I love it.
We'll definitely play it. We'll search it through the internet and play it today. Yeah, I mean today.
Yeah, and something that I find really nice, and I like that you like the same, is that we love when the games are elegant. With a couple of simple rules, the game is perfect, and you don't need to explain more and more and more rules and special examples or special occasions. The less rule the game has, the more elegant it is, and
Absolutely.
we as game designers, we appreciate that a lot.
Absolutely, I entirely agree with you.
I don't know if you know, a game is played a lot in Latin America, in Argentina especially. It's called Carioca, also known as La Loba. Do you know that game?
I have played it. I can't remember it, but it's one of many games that I have explored in the past. Yes,
for sure. It is my favorite card game, and I play with my family every time I visit them. We make like a small tournament, and we play through the summer or through the weekend, and it's very nice. And when I met Mati and other friends in university, and they became my new family, I was like super excited to show them the game. And we played, and they hated it, and I was like, oh no, this is the worst that could happen.
Yeah, it's amazing the way, people either love games or hate them. Particular ones, and you just cannot. If you enjoy a game, it's very difficult to explain what it is you enjoy about it.
Yeah, it's true. Because I think when a game is good, and when you find the right group of friends to play that game with, there is something special going on the table. There is this magical feeling of like enjoyment, but it's very difficult to explain. But I want to go back to this. You said that you read a book about 2-player card games, but since then you started writing a lot of books, and I want to show you that I have one here. This is Teach Yourself Card Games. This is one of the many books you've written. Yes. But my question is, how did you do the research to find all of these games?
Well, it's interesting because as I said, I started exploring card games when I got married, and that was in the late 1960s. And the more I've read about them, the more I wanted to find out about them. And of course, this was years before the internet was available.
Yeah.
So I did my research by buying books in secondhand bookshops, because it's easy to find old books on card games. And I went to a lot of libraries and borrowed books from there. So I was researching these history of card games, which is what I wanted to do throughout the 1970s and the 1980s, and I think when did I get? So I was commissioned to write my history of card games in 1979, I think, and I got everything from books. The amazing thing is, of course, nowadays with the internet, you don't have to buy the original books. So many of those books that I referred to, that I borrowed or read in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, which has a special collection of books on card games, are now available online. Yeah, the amount of years I spent researching from books, you can now do in a matter of months online.
Yep.
It's really amazing.
And at the same time, I find it very funny that you said that you started researching by buying books in like secondhand store and stuff like that, because the idea for this episode and how we ended up contacting you was last year when I was traveling in Egypt, I found your game in one of the secondhand stores, and I bought it saying like, oh, this is really interesting. This is a book about card games. And then when I read who the author was, I found your name, I Googled your name, and it was like, oh, this is the same designer as the Hare of the Tortoise, the game that we played with Matti before. And then this snowballed in finding your website. That also we can say here that it's an amazing website full of stories and anecdotes about games and design theory. And if you want to learn more card games, there are so many there that you will have a different game for each weekend for maybe like 2 years, I would say.
I think so. Yes, I think I've got about 100 card games there.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I want to ask you if you ever, for example, travel to a place wanting to find out more about the game. For example, in Argentina, we have a local game called Truco. It's a trick-taking card game that everyone in Argentina, oh, amazing. Everyone in Argentina knows how to play it. So maybe you travel to Argentina to learn more about the game. So have you ever traveled to a different city or country to learn about the history of a game?
I have traveled quite a lot, but not for that purpose. I'm a member of the International Board Game Studies Association, and we hold a colloquium every year at which people present papers on games history and sociology and mathematics and so on. And this colloquium is usually held in a different country each year. So as a result of that, I mean, I started going to that in 2002. And so I've been to places which I would never have dreamed of going to before. Philadelphia was one of them. And one of them was held in Brazil. And I had always wanted to go to Brazil because when I was a child, my parents told me that one of my uncles had been, before he retired, had been a manager of a gold mine in Brazil. So I thought I must go and see what Brazil is. Brazil was the first idea I ever had in my mind of a foreign country, of somewhere that was not where I was living. So I was delighted to go there for that, even if I did pay for it myself. Whereas a lot of the other such as for the Hare and Tortoise award ceremony, I've had my expenses paid for me, which is nice.
Amazing. I think that's the dream.
As a result of that, I've also been to, Jerusalem was quite an interesting one. This year, unfortunately, I'm not going. It's in Turkey. It's not because of the earthquake that I'm not going. It's simply because I now no longer wish to travel by air. I prefer to go by train. And that's too much of a complicated and expensive journey for me at my age. So I'm not going to do that one. Last year it was in Holland, which was easier.
Yeah, for sure. So if you don't come and visit us in Argentina, I think we will have to go there and you will have to teach us how to play scat then 1 year.
We're 3 people. We want to ask you more about your private life, more to get to know David Parlett. In our initial email, you talked about the first board game magazines, La Revista del Snark. You mentioned the board game designer Jamie Boniakic.
Yes.
What can you tell us about the magazine?
The first magazine in Argentina, like this first magazine about like board games and puzzles in Argentina.
Yeah.
Well, the magazine was sent to Games and Puzzles magazine, so that is how I got it. And I don't think anybody else on the panel could read Spanish, and I could, so I was allowed to take it away with me. And as a result of that, I wrote to Jaime, is it pronounced?
Yeah.
And I had a reply, so we corresponded quite a lot, and he sent me several issues of La Revista del Snark, which I still have, though I can't find them at the moment because my games room is in a mess. We had some repairs done on our roof, so I can't get at them. But they were fun. I enjoyed that, and I was very pleased when he came to London sometime, I think, in the late 1990s or the early 2000s, and I met him in London and his wife, and we got on very well together, so I enjoyed that. This was all nice. I was particularly pleased when you approached me for this interview because you know, I miss having contacts in Argentina.
We are your new Argentinian friends. I think it was really interesting when you replied to us with that, because I didn't know Jaime at first, and then I looked at the La Revista del Snark, which I didn't know as well, and started talking with my father, who has a few copies of another magazine called Juegos y Humor, so humor and games.
Yeah.
And then I said, like, can you take a picture, please, to see who is the publisher or the designer of this magazine? And it was the same guy, Jaime Poniakik. So that was very interesting because we are doing some research into like board game magazines and puzzle magazines. So it was like what you told us was really interesting, and it helped us in our research.
Ah, good. The other interesting thing about Jaime, of course, is that I come back to something I was saying earlier. He was a mathematician.
Yeah, but a lot of puzzle designers are mathematicians. I will say that there is like a huge link between puzzles and mathematics, and that link is logic. Like all puzzles have a logic behind it. If you see the design, they are never random. They don't have any random component. They are all like flesh and bone, let's say.
Right. Yes.
But can you tell us more about your involvement in games and puzzles?
Yes. When I was working in London in a public relations company, I was working as a journalist. I went out for lunch one day and I happened to see in the local stationer's shop a magazine called Games and Puzzles, and it was issue number 1. So I grabbed this because I'd never seen any magazine entirely about games before. And there was an advertisement in there saying, would you like to join our games testing panel? If so, write and introduce yourself. So I wrote and said, yes, I would like to join it. And I went up to London and visited Graham Levine in his office. And we had a chat. And at that time, the game or puzzle which I was most interested in was Solomon Gollum's game of pentominoes. You know, pentominoes? The shapes made of 5 squares stuck together in all possible different arrangements. So I said I would like to write a series about pentominoes. So I wrote this series about pentominoes in Games and Puzzles, and that was the first series of things that I did. But I also wrote reviews of games too. So I got to know other people there. One of them, another great games inventor, was Eric Solomon. Have you heard of Eric Solomon?
Yes, we did. We've seen the webpage in your blog, and we'd read it all, and it's amazing the contribution that he did to British and the world's game design.
Yes, so I met him in 1974 when I first started going to Games and Puzzles, And we were friends all those years until he died, what, 3-4 years ago. And it was a great shame that he died. He didn't have the success that he deserved. Perhaps he was a bit too mathematical, I don't know. So that was great. But I stayed in touch with quite a number of other people from Games and Puzzles, but you know, with the passage of time, quite a lot of them have died.
I think it's very nice and kind that you mentioned him. I believe that you were like really good friends, and I think that's one of the things that sometimes we overlooked in the hobby, that here we met some of our best friends. With Matti, yes. We met through university, but we met because we were talking about Magic the Gathering. Was it Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh, Matti?
I think Yu-Gi-Oh and Hearthstone.
And Hearthstone, yeah. So we started our friendship because of games, and our friendship evolved so much that now we design together, we record together, and we don't marry just because we are like farther away. But yeah, like I think this is one of the best things. The people we meet along the way.
I absolutely agree. The games business is a very friendly business. All the time I've been doing my research, and when I got to going to these colloquia held by the Board Game Studies Association, I have often asked experts in particular fields of games to give me some assistance, and they are always so generous with giving me advice and reading my texts and making corrections for me. It's wonderful. You know, the games world is full of friends like that. And the other thing that struck me, I was told when I was last in Germany, and I was talking to a games, I can't remember who I was talking to, but he pointed out that games manufacturers in Germany, when they're presented with a game for consideration, they might say, well, this is not one of our games, but such and such a publisher might be interested in it. So I suggest you approach them. Now that is friendliness for you.
Yeah, and I think that in Argentina, at least, which is the industry that we know the most, is happening something quite similar. Every time we approach some people that they are designing games as well, or they have their publishing house, every time we approach them saying like, hey, we would like to make you an interview, or we would like to talk with you about this and that, they were always super friendly. And that's something super nice about this world. But before we spread too much from the last question which was about games and puzzles, something that I noticed and I found in our research was that you were writing in that magazine with different nicknames, and I wrote them down here. You wrote as L. Cid, Ted Franklin, Pierre Jackson, and Plateau. My question is now, why did you choose those names, and why were you writing with a nickname?
Okay, my middle name is Sydney.
Okay.
So I didn't want to call myself Sid, so I called myself L. Cid. Okay. PR Jackson. Now that is a private joke. I mentioned my school friend Paul Chown. When we were at school together, our strongest subject, the thing we were best at, was art, actually, drawing and painting. I was always better at art than I was at languages. We had, whenever one of our paintings was put up on the wall in the art room, we would sign it. He and I would both sign our pictures PR Jackson, because it just sounded like an ordinary name of somebody in another class. So when I had I was asked to write a book called about card games, called All the Best Card Games, and this was not on a royalty basis. It was a one-off payment, which I don't like doing for obvious reasons. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll write it for you, but I want to write it under a pseudonym. So I chose P.R. Jackson for that one. In Games and Puzzles magazine, what else did I use? Plato was something I wrote under as well. And I can tell you, in case you don't know, you know that one of the original founders of Games and Puzzles and a later editor was David Pritchard. He wrote under several different names as well. I think he wrote under the name of David Patrick. So that's another nom de plume or nom de jeu or whatever.
And what's the reason behind wanting to sign those games or those puzzles or those reviews under a nickname?
Sorry, say that again.
Why did you decide to use nicknames to sign some of your games?
I didn't want it to look as if I was writing everything in Games and Puzzles.
I knew that was gonna be the answer. Yeah. I see.
It's amazing that you wrote so much and you bring so much information and so much things to the board game industry. I think it's an industry that in Argentina is still young, but in other countries it's like really developed, but we still need to find like common ground.
Yes. Well, I look forward to seeing the development of Raviol games.
Yes.
You will hear about it in the Spiel des Jahres 2030. Give us 7 years and we will release a worldwide hit.
I would look forward to that. Will you I don't suppose you would be going to Essen this year, will you?
Oh,
no,
we wish.
So before now,
I haven't been for several years because of COVID, of course, but I'm looking forward to going again this year, possibly for the last time. I don't know, but if it's going to be for the last time, I want to know it's the last time.
Yeah, no, but we couldn't be in Essen never, but it's something that we would love to go. Just because Essen is so magical and so special inside this hobby.
Of course, the other place you should go to is the DAO Barcelona festival.
Oh yeah.
I've been there several times.
Okay.
That's a lovely place to go, and lots of interesting games people there. You should really visit Barcelona for the DAO festival.
It will be in our plans for sure. David, I believe that you are a big fan of the history of card games and board games.
Yeah.
And I know that in England, but I'm not sure exactly in which city, but there is the museum of board games, and it's been run by Tony Boydell. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Do you know about this?
No, I don't. I've heard his name, but I don't know about. Did you say it was a museum? Yeah, it's the Museum of Board Games, and I think he specializes in like old games, like 50, 70 years old board games, and he collects them and displays them. And I think he opens like almost every day, I think. I knew him because he's also the designer of quite a lot of modern board games, such as Lux Aeterna, and also his latest release. It's a solo game about summoning demons, but I don't remember the name. Aleph Null is the name of this last game, because I helped him testing the game. That's how I met him. Yeah. But I thought that you would know this museum. No, I don't travel around as much as I used to. I will send you the link of it afterwards. Okay, thanks. And I think, Matti, we have one last question, and that was it. But I don't know. I can be here talking the whole night because it's amazing, and also you like talking, David. So yeah, we love that. Oh, good. Yes.
It's been really interesting. I could hear you forever. And we usually have this thing for like the England's accent. So we can hear like stories and anecdotes with your accent forever. We have one last silly question, and it's really silly, and I mean it. We usually ask it to every people we bring to the program, and it's how do you feel today? Like a potato or a crocodile?
I'm trying to imagine a cross between a potato and a crocodile. It's not easy. Well, no, I'm feeling a bit more crocodilian today, but I was rather potato-like yesterday.
Okay, that's an amazing answer. So yeah, perfect. This was David Parlett, author, designer, journalist, consultant, and we hope that our friend.
Indeed, yes. It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who stayed until the end. And yeah, that was Las Cartas sobre la Mesa. See you next Wednesday.